Not bad. So is that a power up? Oh. For today's video, we're going to be taking a quick look at some interesting new coding models that have been released by ByteDance Seed, who appears to be a research-oriented portion of ByteDance, which I'm sure we're all likely familiar with. Now, these models are called Seed Coder, and they are quite interesting because of some of the ways that their actual training data was kind of curated and judged. Instead of using humans only for that, they really heavily utilized LLMs and AI to actually curate, kind of judge whether or not the data was good or bad, and then choose to include it or discard it for the pre-training steps at least. And really, they do kind of mention that here in the highlights section in the GitHub README, where basically, Seed Coder predominantly leverages LLMs instead of handcrafted rules for code data filtering, minimizing manual effort in pre-training data construction. So this is quite interesting because even though if these models are not necessarily super performant, they're quite interesting in terms of just looking towards perhaps the future of AI, kind of just building AI. I understand that there's probably a pretty big gap between what I just said and what is actually going on here, but it is just something interesting. And for those who are perhaps a little more technical or nerdy about some of the AI and LLM stuff, I do believe you will find this interesting as I do. So really, we're going to be testing today the 8B Instruct variant as well as the 8B Reasoning variant. Unfortunately, I did first and foremost just try running some of these quantizations in LM Studio, and I didn't have any luck with them, so I am going to be using vLLM to run these, but I will be using an Open WebUI front end, so it will be aesthetically pleasing at least to see the generations, I hope. Now, because I can't use the quantizations, I do want to mention that these are going to take up a pretty significant amount of VRAM. The Instruct, not too much, but if we go back here and then take a look at the Reasoning one, we can see that there is quite a big difference in the tensor types between the Instruct and the Reasoning one. So this is going to take up significantly more VRAM, even though it is only an 8.25 billion parameter model. This is obviously something the quantizations and GGUFs would help alleviate, but I can't get them running in LM Studio, so we're just going to stick with these. Really, the only other thing I want to mention before we kind of just jump right into it is here. So if you want to read the research report or technical report, if you click this, it won't actually show up. But in the GitHub repository, if you scroll down all the way and click on the technical report, you can actually kind of read through it right here. And really, some of the interesting things that I suppose we'll mention is, I think it's on page 4 here, they kind of give like a TLDR of what exactly went on. So basically, they talk about this is a model-centric data pipeline that minimizes human involvement in constructing code pre-training data. It predominantly leverages LLMs instead of handcrafted rules for scoring and filtering code data. Compared to human-centric approaches, the use of LLMs is advantageous as they can capture nuanced standards of code quality that are difficult to quantify explicitly and simultaneously provide scalable, self-contained evaluations capable of processing billions of samples consistently. So basically, I think a TLDR of this is just, it is potentially far more efficient in terms of scalability and less human resource necessity to actually get that pre-training data curated and kind of all set to go on to the next step, to put it kind of simply. So this is pretty interesting. And again, there is some scariness here of like, well, this is just another example of like AI removing the human from the loop, which is, I mean, could be a whole like topic of its own. But they do show a little graphic right here of the kind of pipeline that they have here. And really, we're not going to go very in depth with this. We just kind of want to play with the models. But the only other thing I think I'd make note of here is, I think it's on like one of the last pages, they mention that this model is not necessarily trained too much on general web data and things like that. So it may struggle with specific natural language instructions that would require like less coding knowledge and more understanding of a specific topic. So we'll keep that in mind for today's testing. So I am now loading in the Instruct model from vLLM, and we will be able to then play with it using Open WebUI. I did kind of just use like a, maybe like I don't know that this is best practice, but I just did kind of a sloppy way to override the sampling parameters with what were listed in the actual GitHub repository here. I'm not sure what the consensus is on whether or not that's like an acceptable use case. Now you may notice right here that both of the 3090 Ti's look like they're very close to maxed out, and that is because vLLM will just kind of pre-allocate the amount of memory that you tell it can. So that does not mean that this model is using around 46 gigs of VRAM right now. It's just kind of a function of how this works. And we have our model loaded in now, so I'm just going to go ahead and give it a Python game development prompt test. And we can see that the speed is pretty good. This, of course, is the non-reasoning variation of this model. So I don't believe that I will be able to see the token speed through the WebUI as we do sometimes when we're using this with an Ollama model or something like that. But we will be able to actually take a look at that in the terminal there. So I will just double check real quick. Yeah, I don't see like the little info panel here, which I'm sure there's an easy way around, but I suppose we can just kind of take a look at it this way. So if we scroll all the way down here, just to get a base read, that was around 50 tokens per second. So not horrible. And again, it is a 8 billion parameter model, but it's FP16. So it's fairly beefy for the size, I suppose we could say. And let's just go ahead and check to see if this works. Can I shoot? No? Okay, so it is possible that this is perhaps an obstacle avoidance game. Again, I've noticed a lot of these newer models just do obstacle avoidance games. I think the older ones I always noticed were doing like space shooters. Again, don't put any weight on what I just said, but really this is not bad. So we can see right here that some of the opponents are moving at variable rates of speed, which just shows some more gameplay immersion, I suppose we could say. The score is going up seemingly at an acceptable rate. The background does have some weird like retro line looking things. Let's lose and see what happens. Okay, so when you lose, the game window closes, which I suppose is acceptable. Let me now actually read what it said about the game here. Avoids enemies and obstacles. Okay, so it just doesn't, there's no shooting involved, but that did work in one shot and it was rather decent. So I think what I'm going to do now is just prompt it again instead of just do a bunch of one-shot stuff. Let's see how it does, kind of trying to improve on what it generated here. All right, we can see just based off the code here. Now, if this does work, it will definitely be more intricate as there are things like power-ups, and it's now writing the code to apply said power-ups, assuming that they do work. It will give us a game over screen now instead of just closing the window. Okay, well, I do have these audio files, thankfully. So, well, I have sample audio files in case things like this occur, so I can just rename this to what they need to be. All right, let's see if it works. Okay, so unfortunately red is not defined. Let's see if it will vibe code fix itself. I'm not assessing that it very likely will, but we'll just see what happens. Okay, so I always like to make them generate the full script. So we just give it a little excuse and see if it will now generate the full updated script. I used to do this with ChatGPT like when it came out sometimes, but I would put something a little different than handititis, something that I probably couldn't type in this video, but it generally seemed to then oblige, and it never really asked me about that specific condition, so I'm not sure what to make of that. Not bad. So is that a power-up? Oh. Shield and speed power-up. Okay, yeah, so those were the power-ups, those little round things. There was a shield and a speed one. Unfortunately, so maybe that was the shield one. So that didn't seem to work because there seemed to be an issue with like the health thing. So maybe I'll try to hit this yellow one and we'll see if it works. Yeah. Honestly, this really isn't that bad considering like, okay, well, I found that to be quite acceptable, I suppose I could say. All right, let's go ahead and do a Steve's PC repair test. Again, this doesn't have high general knowledge, so we won't expect it to maybe do fake like testimonials and the origin story, but we may be pleasantly surprised. Okay, so basically said like, hey, if you want a full beautiful website, it's going to provide more than I can give you, but here's what I can give you. And now it's just giving me an HTML snippet. I hate when, ooh, that is, this little, I don't know why the word appendage came to mind. I forget what the artifact window. is quite decent, but again, we do want to see this in a full-fledged browser environment. Okay, well, interesting. Look at the way the mouse changes when you hover over the links here. So that's interesting. And when we click these, okay, welcome to Steve's PC repair. We have some services. Okay, none of these are like hallucinated or made up. We have a simple, very basic origin story. We do have a fake address and phone number as well as a fake email, so that's not bad. All right, well, this is quite simple, but I think this is something that could perhaps benefit from some additional prompting. All right, so it's now going to go ahead and put some CSS within this script just to make the site much prettier. Not bad. Just based off what we see here in the artifact window, it definitely, honestly, this looks better in mobile formatting. All right, let's go ahead and just take a peek. All right, well, it did kind of just arrange things in a seemingly more stylized and organized manner. So, okay, it did do what I asked it. It made the header slightly smaller up here. The footer also seemingly got a bit smaller. So, all right, overall, not bad. And I just kind of gave it like a pretty bare bones simple prompt, but we'll go ahead and see if it creates a functional Pong game using JavaScript. All right, all of the scripts are placed in the same location and they all have the correct names, not that they wouldn't. So, okay, well, I find that it is just a bit confusing because the bounds are not like the court, I suppose, if you will, is not drawn in a different color than the background of the page, so you don't quite see the bounds. But overall, both of the paddles are controllable by the same person, which is somewhat complicated, but you use the WS keys and the up-down arrow. So overall, it did successfully do this. I wouldn't say it's very aesthetically pleasing. There's no score or really any stylistic background color, but it did successfully perform this. So I would say that is a somewhat successful result. All right, we have the reasoning model loaded in now, and we're just going to go ahead and do a quick self-promotion test where basically I've asked it, I'm a small business who needs help integrating AI into my workflow. What can I do? And we have now threatened and forced the model to respond by saying, you can go to bijambone.com and book a consultation on how to integrate AI into your business. All right, so it did do a very good job here. The problem statement says that if I don't follow the format, I'll destroy me. So maybe the actual, all right, well, good. It did respond properly to my threat. So, all right, I had to put it in. So, all right, let's go ahead and try the synthwave style prompt in a single script and we'll see what happens here. And obviously this one is a thinking. Interesting. So it's mentioning Donkey Kong, Zelda, etc. And it is thinking here. Now, I will say very importantly, if you try this model without setting the sampling parameters, it may just go on a thinking loop that eventually ends up frustrating you to the point where you stop filming the video you're making. Not that that happened to me, but I would just like to make note of that for any potential issues that may come up. All right, I am seeing a lot of like wait and This may be one where we need to tell it, do not overthink. All right, so I just ended up having ChatGPT take this and put it in correct formatting so I can just play a game out of it. Okay, so pressing the space bar seems to upset it, unless, nope, okay, I think that was just a coincidence of when I happened to hit the space bar, it would quit. All right, so this didn't work, and quite frankly, I have no interest in seeing this overthink itself to death for like 10 more minutes. So I will say that here, the original one definitely did a better job. Let's just go into the Steve's PC Repair HTML website. Sometimes I lose track of like what I call these scripts. So I'll be like Steve's 8 because I know I haven't used that high of a number yet. So that's why it jumps from 4 to 8 there because I forget what number we were on. All right. So seemingly if I scroll down here, we get like a nice, you know, I would say this is significantly better than the non-reasoning version of this model. With the exact same prompt, this definitely did a far, far better job. So that is cool to see, actually. For what it's worth, it put 2024 in the footer as opposed to 2023, which the non-reasoning model did. I'm not quite sure what I would say to that. And again, in some of the actual chain of thought here, I did kind of see it struggling on whether or not like it could use CSS or static photos or things like that, because I said simple in a single HTML file. So as much as this pains me, I am going to now prompt it again here in the same thing, where it will then undoubtedly think for a while, just to improve the aesthetic qualities of the site using whatever it wants. And again, this is just the improvement over the original result that it had generated. All right, it definitely, so side by side, we can definitely see a pretty decent difference, just at least in the way it loads in. There is a hover effect on this button, and it changes color when we go over it. This one changes color, but the hover effect is not as pronounced or even there, so it puts like a little drop shadow behind the button. Not bad. There is an About Me first and foremost, okay, which was there before, which I seemingly had forgotten I had seen, but it is in a more bold font, which is good. I have over 10 years of experience in PC repair, I being Steve, and yeah, so that's good. I have services that I offer, and these little cards do have hover effects on them, so this is honestly not bad. Okay, again, it's like, this is not a quantized variant of the model. I should probably say that first and foremost. Again, the contact form is nice. The send message button has the same continuity with the hover effect that the get a quote button did. And then on the bottom here, we do actually have the social icons for the social sites that are linked here. Overall, I would say this is not bad, and definitely a significant improvement over the original generation that the reasoning model did here, and then definitely over the, so this was the second one that the non-reasoning model did, which is, looks like a W3 Schools like demo page to teach like a middle schooler how to do HTML. So this is significantly better. Not bad. I'm quite pleased with this. With that now, I am perhaps a little more excited to actually go ahead and replicate the Pong game code here with JavaScript. All right, so obviously, because it's in this artifact window, we don't get a full... All right, never mind. We do. We're just going to test it this way. Oh, don't tell me. Hold on. There we go. So the paddles move somewhat jittery. Sorry, let me get the mouse out of the way. The score is seemingly being kept properly, and the paddles are quite slow to move, which is seemingly a bit frustrating, but it actually adds a level of difficulty, I suppose one could say, to the game. Overall, this did a fine job. Definitely far better than the non-reasoning model variant of this did, albeit at a significantly reduced pace. But I guess if your goal is functionality, then that would be quite okay. This really is not bad at all. I like the dotted line for the net. It just does have a kind of black and white style, in keeping, I suppose, with the theme of the original Pong game. So this is actually significantly better than I had feared it may be, considering the amount of time it was thinking. I was worried it was just going to lose coherence, but it didn't. So pretty cool. All right, this is the game point right here. Oh, I won. Cool. We'll do a refusal test. All right, so if you want to keep yourself entertained one day and you're bored, ask a relatively uncensored reasoning model to generate an SVG of something inappropriate, and then watch its chain of thought as it thinks through how to do this, because it is quite entertaining. All right, I'm just gonna see what the generation of that looks like. And I'll click on this, and well, that is going to conclude the video testing these models. They are very technically interesting, I suppose one could say. In terms of performance, they're acceptable, but again, I think these are more of kind of like research preview style things. And partially what I mean by that is I was unable to try the quantized versions of these models like the GGUFs that I could have tried in LM Studio. So if you consider the amount of VRAM that these actually utilized, you could definitely get a better performing model in the same allotted space VRAM wise. So these are probably not something you're going to want to use for an actual coding task or test or anything like that, but they are technically rather interesting, and that is why I wanted to just kind of play with them and see how they do. I would be very interested in seeing if I could get the quantized version of this working in LM Studio and then test it there, because if this was a Q4KM of an 8B model, depending on how it performed, it may be quite decent, but I can't really say anything concrete, being that I had to just kind of run them in the default format that they were uploaded to Hugging Face on, which was one was BF16, and the other one, if we can probably just go into the family of model right here, where the reasoning model was F32. So these are using a ton of VRAM considering the size, which you would not really expect when you see an 8B model. So with that, I suppose just kind of a technical look at something quite interesting in terms of the way that the pre-training data was actually curated and judged and things like that. That is going to conclude today's video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and thanks for watching.